to, warn like a potential election candidate. So, like, what would the briefing look like in terms of, who to look out for, what kinds of things? What is the difference between
This is the
interference
big
and
question, and I think it's not an easily resolvable one. And I'm not sure all the political parties necessarily want the same thing. But because right now, my understanding is that the only real vetting that takes place of people is when they're being considered for cabinet. And that there isn't kind of a general vetting of everybody who might be running for Parliament. That's a lot of work. It takes a lot of resources. But that, I think, has to be part of the conversation. The other thing that has to be part of the conversation is who's coming out to nomination meetings. How are these things being run? Are they being manipulated by anybody? Are people who are not Canadian citizens being bussed in to vote for preferred candidates? So, it's a lot. And it's, as I say, it's changing. And just because we have been focusing on China, there have been reports recently that, and not surprisingly, that the Russians are interested in all NATO countries in trying to have people be less supportive of support to Ukraine.
Okay, and you said the nature of the threats changing as it evolves. What are the things that you're seeing changing from before when you were doing the report?
Well, I think one of the interesting things about my report is that, and we haven't talked about this at all, is that the protocol talked not just about foreign interference, but domestic interference as well. They're very different animals, and one of the frustrations I had is that there was no publicity about this protocol before the election, unlike 2019. The protocol was put up on the government's website when the election was called, and it was different. And now it said domestic interference, and frankly, nobody knew exactly what that meant. And the only thing I know that it means isn't the typical kind of interference, but there were increasing concerns about violence from domestic actors, with respect, I know, to the leader of the NDP and to some extent to the Prime Minister. Yeah, so that's an issue, but I said to the PCO, you really, nobody seems to really understand well enough what it means to have domestic interference in this report and what you're going to do about it, and are there different parameters on it than you would apply to foreign interference. It's, you cannot take away the free speech of Canadians. You can't, Canadians can say whatever they want about an election. I mean, within limits of hate or whatever.
So are you talking about like misinformation, disinformation?
Yeah.
Is that like a key threat?
It's a key threat from not just foreign actors, but we recognize increasingly from domestic actors, violent extrumism.
And you mentioned that there's a number of countries involved. What other countries do you think that,
Well, the Iranians.
What other countries?
We know. The Russians, the Chinese. There may be some others that I'm not privy to say.
Thank you, Mr. Baines, Mr. Rosenberg. We're resetting now. 6-minute rounds to start, and we are going to go to Mr. Cooper for 6 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Rosenberg. Mr. Rosenberg, you claim that the source of the donation was the Millennium Golden Eagle International Canada, Inc., yet on July 14th, 2016, when you sent international bank transfer instructions, nowhere mentioned in that letter is Millennium Golden Eagle International Canada, Inc. The only names on that letter were Bin and Nu. Why?
I don't have the document, and I can't answer the question because I don't recall right now.
Highly suspicious. You signed it, highly suspicious that on a document sent to transfer the money, that nowhere is that entity mentioned, just the names of those donors. You claim that the receipt was sent to the registered office of this company, but yet in the September 26, 2016 correspondence with the Trudeau Foundation, the address that the receipt was requested to be sent is the same address as the China Cultural Industry Association. Can you explain that?
Well, I'll say two things. First of all, I know that Mr. Zhang was the president of Millennium International and director of Millennium Canada. I'm not sure what other positions were. Also the president of the China.
Yeah. And you know what the China Cultural Industry Association is? It's a company that is associated with the United Front Work Department. And Mr. Rosenberg, you said with a straight face that you saw no evidence of a foreign interference network with respect to this donation. What does Millennium Golden Eagle International do, by the way? What do they do?
As far as I know, they're a media company.
Did you ever bother to do any due diligence? Did you bother to even go to their website? Because maybe if you did, Mr. Rosenberg,
Point of
Mr.
order,
Chair,
Mr. Chair.
This better be on a procedural basis.
I'm just wondering if there is any procedure to ensure that witnesses that come before this committee are treated with respect.
I'm not seeing any evidence of disrespect. I'm seeing a hard line of questioning from Mr. Cooper. If it does cross that line, I'll deal with it. And I do want to remind members of the committee that points of order are on procedural basis, not because you don't like what you're hearing, okay? Go ahead, Mr. Cooper. I stopped your time. You have 3 minutes and 35 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Did you bother to even go onto the website of this company?
So, as I've explained, the way receipting was dealt with.
I guess the answer to that is no, because if you had bothered, it's a yes/no
Mr.
question.
Cooper, you do have to give him a chance to answer, please. Go ahead.
Sorry, receipting was done by staff in the foundation in conjunction with our accountant. And when I got a receipt to sign, I assumed that it was fine.
Hopefully they knew how to use Google, because had they bothered to do so, had you bothered to do your due diligence, you would have known that the website of the Millennium Golden Eagle International states that as part of her mandate is to take governmental guidance from Beijing. If you had bothered to do your due diligence, you would have known that Zhang Bin was a political advisor to the Beijing regime. You came before this committee with a straight face as the former Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, and you said, there's nothing to see here in the face of that. Are you serious?
Yeah, I'm serious, and I'll answer your question. First of all, Zhang Bin was introduced to Mr. Lefebvre at the University of Montreal by our ambassador in China, Mr. Guy Saint-Jacques, who I actually spoke to yesterday. Mr. Saint-Jacques was very well aware of the associations that Mr. Zhang had, and I think it was felt that almost everybody in China who was anybody had some connection with the government. The question was, what were they trying to influence?
And this agreement began to crystallize with this individual associated with the United Front Work Department, with this shell company, with that had an address that was a house in Dorval, that whereby it was insisted upon that as a condition the Prime Minister's brother be involved, that all of this was happening 1 month before a federal election campaign,
Well,
and you didn't see anything to be concerned about, nothing at all to be, nothing, no red flag for you that would have said, maybe we should look into this, maybe we should do our due diligence, maybe there's something here. Nothing at all.
First of all, these discussions started in 2014, and before I arrived at the foundation, long before the federal election in 2015. Mr. Lefebvre, who was negotiating this principally, was advised by our ambassador in China that Mr. Zhang was a good person to talk to. And you know, at that time, there were lots of Canadian organizations that were dealing with
Mr. Rosenberg, there's one of two things that are possible. Either you are completely incompetent or you were willfully blind. There is nothing in your record to indicate that you were incompetent. The only conclusion that I can draw is that you were willfully blind.
Hey, Mr. Cooper, thank you for your time. Let's have some decorum here, please. We are going to go now to Mr. Fergus for 6 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Mr. Rosenberg, let me first apologize for the needless insults that you had here, given your long history and service to our country. We can ask tough questions, but we don't have to be disagreeable to do so. Sir, let's talk about tax receipts. Can tax receipts be used by any person or company that doesn't pay taxes in Canada?
As far as I know, they can't. That even, the example I would use is if I make a donation to a Canadian company and I'm retired and go and spend 6 months in the south of France and say, send the receipt to my address in the south of France, I get it there, and then I will file the receipt with my income tax to get a deduction from my tax. And I think this is something along the lines of what happened here. The assumption that we were somehow nefariously trying to hide the real identity of the donor, the check came from this Millennium Golden Eagle Canada Inc. The receipt was made out to Millennium Golden Canada Inc. This is why I think there needs to be an independent investigation on this whole thing. Somebody not only needs to look at the documents, but needs to bring in the people at the Trudeau Foundation who were there at the time. And frankly, maybe somebody should go and speak to the company in Dorval. Maybe somebody should speak to the Revenue Agency about whether they thought there was anything untoward about this. We had no malevolent intent. We thought and believed strongly that we were complying with the law, sending the receipt to the person who made the donation.
Fair enough. Let's also talk about the meeting at L'Ange Vin Bloc, as it was known at the time. You had indicated in your testimony, and I think the record would state that that building is used by the Prime Minister's office. It's also used by the Privy Council office, Privy Council being a central agency of the government. Deputy ministers, of course, have a particular responsibility. The clerk would be your boss.
Well, sort of, yeah.
Of the deputy minister community, I would assume. Deputy ministers often go outside to seek advice.
Yes.
Before I became a member of Parliament, I used to work for Canada's universities. I know that on occasion, some of our researchers, or frankly, some of the university presidents or college presidents, were invited to offer an opinion on particular subjects. I'm assuming that the meeting that or can you please indicate to us what was the intention behind the meeting that you had set up at that time?
As I said to Mr. Villemur, the intention of the meeting was we knew that the government had diversity and pluralism as a priority back in 2015. We had a fellow from, I believe, the University of Waterloo, and one of our mentors who was a former diplomat, who were doing a research study on the economic benefits of diversity, which varied very much from industry to industry. The ethnic composition varied from industry to industry. And we thought that it would be an interesting public, piece of research that could help the government as it developed its policies. So I spoke with a deputy secretary in PCO, and I said, hey, we're doing this work. Do you think this would be of interest to people? He said, yeah, because this touches the work of Industry Canada, of Immigration Canada, of Heritage, I forget who else. So it was kind of a horizontal issue. People knew me and thought, I guess, that I had credibility, and so were willing to come to a meeting with me.
Let's talk in 2 minutes I have left. 2.5? 1:45. I'll try to be quick then. Let's go back to the question of influence. And I'd like to go back to the question that Madame Martinez Ferrada had asked you. when these negotiations, when the first contact had happened, it happened in 2014. Is that correct?
Yes, as far as I know.
Between the then president of Université de Montréal. Go ahead.
The vice rector international of the University of Montréal.
Thank you for that correction. 2014, I certainly remember that because that was the year that I was nominated. I could tell you we were nominated and into a situation where we were polling second, moving on to third, dropping in the polls. If you were a foreign government trying to influence an organization, you'd think that they would go after the party that was number one in the polls. Second, when there was no request, as you answered the question, from the donor to influence the study program, to speak out on issues, to avoid speaking out on issues, can you confirm that that is the case, that there were no demands whatsoever?
There were no demands. And in fact, I mean, one of the other things that's interesting, and there is an article in Le Devoir, there are two articles in Le Devoir that I will provide. One is an interview with Mr. Saint-Jacques, and the other is an interview with Mr. Lefebvre. And the interview with Mr. Lefebvre says, absolutely, the Trudeau Foundation wasn't involved from the start. And he then says in the article, l'implication de l'organisme, so that is the foundation, fondé en mémoire de
created in memory of former Prime Minister Trudeau. Mr. Jiang was not happy that there was an additional person.
article, and he wasn't very happy about it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Fergus. We went over a little bit on that one. Monsieur Villemure, vous êtes prochain.
You have 6 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Rosenberg, you mentioned that we were not talking about your report. Following up on what my colleague asked, can you tell us the difference between influence and interference? I think that one of the main differences is that influence is soft power, and there are a lot of countries, including us, that use this. And I would like to insist on this. The mentality in the 2010s was so different. But the difference between influence and interference. Interference is covert action.
Clear. With the Chinese, one of the things that's really difficult is that, you know, if you take what happened in BC with, I guess it's Kenny Chu's writing, there was stuff that started in China in newspapers. It got picked up on WeChat. And then there were people in the community who said, gee, you know, this guy Kenny Chu is a bad guy because he'll bring in this foreign influence registry that's going to require all Chinese to register, and that the Conservative Party is going to break relations or whatever. Mm-hmm. The question is, how much of this is being orchestrated by Beijing, and how much of this is a genuine view of Chinese Canadians or other Canadians? Because there are people in Canada who have business relations with China and who have very strong interests in maintaining those. And if a party takes a view that's counter China, they may, completely in good faith, be expressing their views. On the other hand, there are other people who may have family in China that's been threatened, and they need to speak the party line. How you tell the difference between the two is very hard.
C'est ambigu.
It is ambiguous, yes. In your report, and I read it, I imagine that your qualifications were the fact that you were a Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs. Are there any other considerations? I was chosen because I had 2 relevant experiences, one with Foreign Affairs, well, 3. One with Justice, because the Deputy Minister of Justice was a member of that panel of deputy ministers, and I spent some time at the Privy Council office. So they wanted someone who could understand how things worked, and I had that knowledge. Mr. Judd, my predecessor, who was a former deputy minister at Defense, and at a information department has similar knowledge, but your report states the protocol, how it was used, and what could be improved. In your report, there are 23 words on 23,000 that talk on interference, so it's not a report on interference. But at the same time, for months, the Prime Minister was saying that in your report, you concluded that there's no interference. What we're hearing in the House was that your report states that there was no interference when, in fact, you don't mention it really in your report. My report is a report on the protocol. At the beginning of my report, I have a bit of an introduction in order to educate people on what interference is. And I took the words from people that I interviewed, including security services and of deputy directors from CSIS. What you have in the report is great. How you organize it is fine. But there are 4 lines on page 46 that say that there was no interference. But the Prime Minister is saying that the report states as a conclusion that there was no interference, whereas that's not what your report was about. It wasn't a report on interference.
States Director of National Intelligence does a report on foreign interference, a secure version and a public version, within a couple of months after the election, and we should consider doing the same thing.
It's a very interesting recommendation. So would you agree with me that the interpretation by the Prime Minister is exaggerated? Well, because I didn't hear what the Prime Minister said, I cannot give my opinion on that. We also called into question your independence. But when we have a direct link with the Trudeau Foundation and then a donation, it seems like it's not independent. It seems like it's everything but independent. With all due respect, I think that what I was asked to do, even if I was a member or president of the foundation, would it eliminate me from different jobs because I worked at the foundation? I didn't think that what happened in 2016 was linked to interference, and I can read it again. Professor Work's words, and he says, just one moment. That's fine. I do remember what you said earlier, so I was just saying that it doesn't disqualify you. But do you believe that it's reasonable that people are calling into question your independence? The perception was created, but I don't think it's reasonable. Thank you, Mr. Villemur.
Mr. Green, you have 6 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Mr. Rosenberg, I can imagine that, being before this committee, considering some of the allegations, insinuations, and outright attacks on your character and reputation are probably not easy for you to sit through. You've stated that you thought that a public inquiry might have helped. Do you agree that perhaps this could have been avoided if the relationship between the former Governor General, Mr. David Johnson, the foundation, and quite frankly, the investigation into this, could that have helped your position as the former president and CEO of the organization?
So I think there are a whole lot of balls up in the air on this.
There sure is.
I said at the end of my remarks, with respect to all this stuff about the Trudeau Foundation and the 2016 donation, that there should be an independent investigation. I think that's different than the broader issue of an investigation into the issue of election interference.
Mr. David Johnson was a member of the Trudeau Foundation, correct?
He was a member of the Trudeau Foundation, yes.
And would you not take a political risk analysis as a former DM to say that this also complicates the relationship with the?
Yeah, well, I was nonpartisan as a deputy, and I don't think I'm going to wade into whether, I mean, I have enormous respect for Mr. Johnson.
Well, let me just put this to you in a very direct way. Given that the insinuations have been put here, and quite frankly, I am unconvinced at this moment that this is, it's simply a matter of governance. Like it's very difficult for me to unpack, what's been presented by your testimony and Ms. Fournier. And so could you not contemplate, sir, that this particular situation wouldn't also be included in an investigation in foreign interference, given the allegations?
I guess somebody would have to look at what the appropriate mandate for that is. I will tell you, whatever happens, whether it's a public inquiry or parliamentary committee or NSI COP or whatever, we'll have to have a focused mandate on this. Otherwise, it's just not going to be worth anything. And the other thing I would say, I really hope that the focus on what happened in the 2021 and 2019 election doesn't take away from people thinking about what's happening right now as we go forward.
I'm going to intervene. Mr. Zhang, he's a Chinese citizen, correct?
As far as I know, yes.
Okay. As far as you know. So in the process
I
of...
believe he's a Chinese citizen,
Right.
yes.
So you are somebody who's prided yourself in your testimony as being someone who provides the government with advice on protocols. And yet the testimony of Ms. Fournier painted a very different picture of the governance of the Trudeau Foundation. One of the things that I've had trouble reconciling, given my experience with a local foundation and the high level of diligence that was presented by a community foundation, is the lack of due diligence, quite frankly, at the Trudeau Foundation. So you have all of these subject matter experts around the table at the board. Nobody's raising issues. Nobody in her testimony is recusing themselves from the perception of conflict of interest. Can you just state for the record, in your own ability to kind of perhaps respond to some of those allegations, what was the state of the governance of the Trudeau Foundation under your leadership?
I think the state of the governance was pretty good under my leadership.
Did you have, in retrospect, the appropriate protocols in place to deal with the political sensitivity of running a foundation on the former Prime Minister's name while his son is the current Prime Minister and his brother is on the board?
Well, so first of all, the first thing that was done, and it was done, I think, he stopped being active before I came on the scene.
But his name didn't.
His name with an asterisk.
Do you think that Mr. Zhang Bing would have provided a $1 million donation after the 2016 Pay for Access Liberal fundraiser dinner? Do you think he would have done that if the foundation's last name was Smith?
First of all, they provided us with $200,000, not $1 million. And I just want to say one other thing about what was provided and the whole issue of influence. Back then, and Mr. Lefebvre actually talked about this in an article that he wrote, it's not that we were naive that we were dealing with people that were linked to the Chinese government, because just about everybody was. What we were naive about is that we actually believed by dealing with them that we would have soft power influence on them and change. I'm telling you.
It's the mistake of every Western country who thinks they're going to have soft power over China,
That's
sir.
where we were.
You are the former DM to Foreign Affairs. And respectfully, I've been pretty neutral until that comment, because that has a level of hubris that I think is the challenge that this foundation is facing, quite frankly, that has gotten us into this mess. So I want to dial in on the $200,000 donation. I thought a subsequent larger offer was presented and then rejected, but I may have recollected incorrectly. So in her testimony to this committee, Ms. Fournier stated that you had not asked to receive the remaining $60,000 of the donation, which was due on July 1st, 2018. Why did you not take the rest of the money?
I don't recall. I was just about out the door on July 1st.
You don't recall why you, so
Well,
just so that
I
we're
think
clear, your records indicate that in subsequent years, your average donation, a total donation was like $25,000. This was an outlier donation. You are an endowment that is not dependent on donations. You took $200,000 and then didn't take the last payment. You would have been the one to make the decision not to take the last payment. Why?
I don't recall at the moment why. I would say this, given all the publicity around the donation in the Globe and Mail, we had to kind of put off the conferences that we were going to have.
Last question, with that scrutiny,
Mr. Green?
did you enact any type of investigation after that?
No, we didn't.
Okay. That's the first round of questioning. We're next going to go to a 5-minute round, second round, and we are going to begin with Mr. Brock. Go ahead, Mr. Brock, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Rosenberg, just want to confirm, we've heard a number of issues. I just want to confirm one point with respect to Alexander Trudeau. Your evidence is, to the best of your recollection, without referring to any of the documentation you had before you, that Alexander Trudeau was only instrumental in negotiating one contract for the Trudeau Foundation, yes or no?
To the best of my recollection, yes.
Thank you. Following up on Mr. Green's last question to you, I'm not satisfied with your response that it was close to my departure. That payment was due July the 1st, correct? Pursuant to the contract?
I'd have to look at the contract, but I'm assuming it was.
First payment 2016, second payment 2017, third payment?
I'd have to look at the contract
Right,
to see.
okay. Now, you also interviewed with Vashi Kapelis on CTV Question Period some time ago, and you were quoted as saying that if the situation existed today, in hindsight, looking at it from a 2023 perspective, not a 2016 perspective, you would not have accepted donation. I think there would have been a different decision made for sure. You stand by that statement?
Yeah, but as I said.
Thank you. You'd agree with me, being a DM of Foreign Affairs, the very issue of foreign election interference was very much on the radar map in 2016, as it certainly is in 2023.
I would say only after the U.S. election.
I think you also appreciate, sir, that there has been a number of articles, a number of interviews that have been given by a number of entities that have severely questioned your integrity and your character with respect to your handling of this particular donation, and you being instrumental in preparing the report sent to the Prime Minister. Media is asking questions, questioning your integrity and ethics. Canadian politicians are asking the very same question. Canadians are asking that question. Particularly Chinese Canadians are asking that question. And now we find out your former colleagues at the foundation are asking that question. Now, according to you, from all the evidence that I've heard...
Which former colleagues?
I'm not going to specify that. What I've heard so far from you today is, notwithstanding everything that is going around this situation, you saw no red flags whatsoever with respect to this donation. Correct?
At the time, that is correct. We actually thought there was no pressure put on us, that the money actually came with no strings attached, and that the issue, the idea of putting on conferences to do with China was
Thank you.
actually very attractive.
Thank you, sir. No strings attached and no direct efforts to influence Justin Trudeau, the new Prime Minister of this country. You didn't see any red flags whatsoever,
I did not.
right?
That's correct.
In fact, you told Vashi you had no reason to think there was anything untoward about the donation. Donations were putting on conferences, correct?
Correct.
Notwithstanding that at the time, you also knew that there was a report from the Globe and Mail regarding a leaked CSIS source.
At the time, no.
And the CSIS source intercepted a 2014 conversation between Mr. Zhang and an unnamed commercial attaché at one of China's consulates in Canada. They discussed the federal election that was expected to take place in 2015 and the possibility that the Liberals would defeat Stephen Harper's Conservatives and form the next government. The diplomat told Mr. Zhang that Beijing would reimburse him for the entire amount of the donation to the Trudeau Foundation, according to the source. I am gobsmacked, beyond belief, to listen to you in the role as president and CEO and a former deputy minister of foreign affairs to suggest you knew nothing about CSIS intercepting a very important call. You know CSIS reports to the government on any political interference whatsoever. You know that.
Would you like me to answer?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, the first I ever heard of that was in an article that was published in the Globe and Mail on February 28th of 2023.
No one believes you. Canadians don't believe you, sir.
How?
Mr. Chair.
Just,
Sorry.
again, on a point of order, we're
I'm
like
referring
3
to-
seconds left here, Mr. Fergus.
I think it's important to raise, regardless of the time that's left, if it had been at the beginning or at the end. I'm referring to Standing Order 117, decorum. Mr. Chair, I think it is incumbent upon us to conduct ourselves with decorum and to allow not only the witness to answer the question, but to refrain from impugning the character of the witness when they're in the middle of answering a question that could answer the
Thank
question.
you. And I've read the standing order, Mr. Fergus, and my expectation from all members is that they treat our witnesses with courtesy and respect. That's my expectation. If I see any evidence otherwise, I'll certainly intervene, and I have intervened at least on one occasion today. And I thank you for that intervention on the standing order. Mr. Brock, you had, according to my clock, 3 seconds left. I'm not sure that we can gain anything.
My point's been made.
Thank you, sir. Okay, we're going to, la prochaine intervention est pour...
Now we have Miss Martinez-Ferrada. Oh, Mr. Fergus.
You have 5 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, and thank you again, Mr. Rosenberg. And once again, I feel obliged to offer some apology to you. Let's talk again, or let us go a little bit deeper in terms of where we were in 2014. At that time, you had indicated that all governments were seeking China was not considered in a poor light, and the regime was not considered in a poor light that it is today.
Correct.
At that time, would we be signing a foreign investment protection agreement at this point in 2023? Would it be reasonable to say that the reason why we signed one in the 2010s is because it was seen as in the interest of Canada to do so?
I assume when the government of Canada acts, it's in the interest of the government of Canada.
Fair enough. In regard to that, was at the time, again, that this was being offered, this donation was being offered to the foundation, you were answering a question to Mr. Green, indicating that, in fact, you thought it was an opportunity for Canada to be able to use its soft power. In what ways did you think that Canada could have used its soft power? Was it on academic freedom? Was it on research? What?
I think the negotiations evolved, but I'm going to try and... So Mr. Lefebvre, in one of the articles that he talked about this, he actually said that he thought at the time that engaging with the Chinese would give him and the University of Montreal an opportunity to kind of make them familiar with our governance methods, with the rule of law issues, with human rights issues. Was that naive at the time? In hindsight, probably it was naive. I remember, under the Harper government, going to China and having a dialogue with my colleague, and part of my instruction, and I followed it, was to raise human rights issues with the Chinese. They didn't like it, but we did it, because at that time we honestly believed that and this is going back to like Bill Clinton and bringing them into the WTO, that if we only brought them into the international economic system, that they would over time become more democratic. We were wrong. We were wrong, but we believed that. And that's why, and that belief still existed in the 2010s. And that's why we operated that way. So I'm sorry, Mr. Green, doesn't buy that, but I think we felt that we could do more good. We weren't being told what to do, that having conferences on climate change, on trade, even on human rights issues and other global issues would be a good thing, and that some of the Chinese students who were at the University of Montreal who'd attend those would be influenced by them. And the University of Montreal believed that the Chinese students, because they did have a Chinese students program, being exposed to our way of life, to our rule of law, would, I guess by osmosis in a way, impact China. I don't think any of us saw the current regime coming, and it took a number of years for us to change our mind. In 2017, you had an article in University Affairs by the rector at the University of Ottawa saying, let's do more research with China. This is in 2017. It took a while. It took the wolf warrior diplomacy. It took the change of attitude in Hong Kong. It took the kidnapping of the two Michaels for us to realize this is not the China that we were dealing with a few years ago. But until then, I think a lot of us were in a more naive place. Hindsight is 20/20.
Truly is. In regard, again, to the donation itself, and I just want to get back to this. Once again, that donation, in terms of sending that receipt out, you quite cogently had pointed out that it was similar to if you were working in a different a different place. So that receipt really had no value whatsoever, except if it were used in the purposes of filing one's taxes.
As far as I understand it,
by a
yes.
business or by an
Yeah.
individual.
Yeah, I'm not a tax accountant, but it seems pretty obvious.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
C'est 5 minutes. Merci. Thank you, Mr. Fergus. As it stands right now, we started at around 5:52, so we've got 2.5 minutes for Mr. Villemure and Mr. Green, and I think we're going to split 2.5 minutes each between the Conservatives and the Liberals to conclude this round of questioning. Monsieur Villemure, vous avez 2 minutes et demi.
You have 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. You'll understand, Mr. Rosenberg, that if the company doesn't want to have a tax deduction, if there's interference, well, that tax deduction doesn't matter. You stated earlier, or you talked earlier about perception, and in this case that independence was not possible. What is your connection to Justin Trudeau? I don't have a connection with Justin Trudeau. I met him for maybe 15 seconds at a meeting, a cabinet retreat, when I was a part of a panel of deputy ministers that offered a briefing to new cabinet members. So no link. No. What about Alexandre Trudeau? I know him more because he was a board member at the Trudeau Foundation when I was there. Would you agree with me in saying that even though you only met Justin Trudeau for 15 seconds, he could still have influence, even if he says nothing? Just the fact that he was there and the fact that he's Prime Minister has its importance. Do you not believe that could be influence? I don't know, but for me, no. Because I always acted during my career in government. I always gave my best advice, and I always acted independently, and that is what I did at the Trudeau Foundation as well. What would you say to Canadians saying that they don't believe that there is independence, that there is no influence? Because there's a lot of doubt here. So what would you say to Canadians? Well, the only thing that I can say is that I always tried to stay independent. I cannot change the perception of people who don't want to believe me, unfortunately. But I've always tried to be independent, and I never acted in bad faith. I wanted to support the best, or I wanted to support the foundation as best I could. You were saying that Canada was a little bit naive in 2016, but some other countries were less naive. Correct? I think that and there was a gradual change during that time, and then around 2018, 2019, things changed significantly. Thank you, Mr. Villemur.
Mr. Green, you have 2 minutes and 30 seconds and maybe a couple of seconds extra after that intervention by Mr. Villemur. Go ahead, Mr. Green.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Rosenberg, you've now undergone almost 2 hours of what feels like cross-examination. I want to give you the benefit here. There's been allegations made. There's been some direct, comments on your character in terms of whether you're believable or not. There was testimony of Madame Fournier, who raised some significant issues. To the benefit of your reputation and your standing, I want to provide you the opportunity to say anything in response to any outstanding issues that you would like to have on the record.
Well, the one I want to go back to is CSIS uncovering a Chinese plan to donate to the Trudeau Foundation. This appeared in the Globe on February 28th of this year. It was based on an anonymous source, apparently not based on a document. This is intelligence. Intelligence is different than evidence, and I'm going to tell you something that some of you may have heard from David Morrison when he appeared at the other committee, the House committee. He said, intelligence rarely paints a full or concrete or actionable picture. It's not truth. It's often inaccurate or partial or incomplete. And in fact, we don't know what happened to that intelligence. We don't know where it went. We don't know who was briefed on it. We don't know if anybody was briefed on it. We don't know if it was taken seriously or not. I wasn't briefed on it. There is a question as to, and it's a policy question, as to how far CSIS should go outside the government when they become aware of something that might affect another non-government Canadian organization. And I understand there are limits on them with respect to revealing sources or methods, but maybe they need to be a bit more proactive in speaking and letting people know, and this is not just CSIS, but the whole security community, what is the public interaction of the transparency of the Canadian security community. I didn't know about this. I don't think anybody knew about this until February 28th, and to say that nobody believes me, frankly, I'm insulted by that.
I appreciate that, and with my remaining 15 seconds, I would say, to give you one more opportunity, would you not agree that an independent public inquiry into the matter might help clear the air?
I think an independent public inquiry is a reasonable option. There are other reasonable options as well. And I would hope if there is an independent public inquiry that it actually finds a way of making sure that not everything is happening in secret, because there's an awful lot of security information that will never get into the public. So the public part of the inquiry might be very much in question.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Mr. Barrett, you have 2.5 minutes, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, someone calls you a liar.
Sir, you said that intelligence is different than evidence. Of course it is. Did you meet with PRC diplomats to arrange this donation?
No.
Okay, we have an ATIP, an Access to Information record, that says that in Montreal on the 24th of September 2014, you attended a meeting with the a consular official from the PRC. Does that jog your memory?
Yeah, yes. I'm
Okay.
just going to look at that. Sorry about that.
At the end of that same document that I'm referencing, that you've acknowledged now, it says, once the proposal is ready, the foundation will involve Alexandre Trudeau. So we talk about evidence. So we have evidence that the president of the foundation met with consular officials from a foreign government to arrange a donation where they have the brother of, you're shaking your head, sir, but I'm reading to you from the document which you first said you didn't meet with them, but now you acknowledge that you did because I brought receipts. So we've got the receipts, and you said it was extraordinary that, and you can't recall another time that Alexandre Trudeau would sign a donation agreement. So he did it in this case. So the foundation met with a foreign government, arranged this donation, ensured, and it's minuted that it was a requirement to have Mr. Trudeau personally involved. At the time, even without the benefit of hindsight, could you not see that this was a foreign influence operation? This is not based on intelligence. This is based on evidence.
Yes.
So you differentiated before in your response to another colleague. I'm seeing here that you attended the meeting, that the consular officials from the PRC, from the communist dictatorship in Beijing were at the meeting, and that the direction out is to have Mr. Trudeau involved, and that's what they got. So they asked for it, the PRC asked for it, the PRC got it, and the Trudeau Foundation got the $140,000, and the individuals who were cutouts acting on behalf of the dictatorship both got access directly to the Prime Minister. Within 5 months of this 2-year process, within 5 months, they both had access
Mr. Barrett?
directly to the Prime Minister.
Mr. Barrett, that's your
So,
time.
can I answer?
I'm going to give you a time, like a quick time to
Okay.
respond. Go ahead.
So first of all, I apologize. I didn't look at the whole list of attendees. I didn't mean to mislead anybody on that. But secondly, this was an initiating meeting. This was not about the donation. At this point, they were talking about a donation to the University of Montreal and to other universities in Canada. And then there was a committee set up with 3 people, Mr. Zhang, Madame Comtois, and Benoit Moore from the University of Montreal. And the evolution of this happened as a result of that. It didn't come out of this meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenberg. Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Mr. Baines, final intervention for 2.5 minutes. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. And you talked a little bit about intelligence versus evidence, and we heard from a witness previously, former executive at CSIS, also stated that the documents that are now reported as reports in certain media, aren't actually coming from CSIS, that they think they're from somebody else, somebody with an agenda. Where could these where could this be coming from? And ultimately, with respect to how it's being reported, what are you just mentioned? If you can expand a little bit on that.
Okay, well, we don't know where it's coming from because my understanding is, it's interesting, there was a discussion in the U.S. after that young gamer leaked all that information, that there are like thousands, if not more, top secret clearances in the United States. I don't know how many top secret clearances there are in Canada, but they're not just in CSIS. They are in the Privy Council office. They are in Foreign Affairs. They are in Justice. They are in Finance. They're in ministers' offices. They're everywhere. Who knows where it came from? I would say, know a little bit about CSIS, that they didn't come from CSIS. I would surmise. I don't know for sure. They came from somewhere. And then the question is, what is the value of them? And this is what we don't know. We don't know if this is a draft that somebody had, if this is a conversation that somebody had, if it was dismissed. In other words, the veracity and the weight of the intelligence is, when it comes out through an anonymous source, it's really, really hard to gauge. And yet, it's being taken as the gospel truth.
And now I want to just switch a little bit. You talked also about our security establishment engaging with diaspora communities. How can they do that better?
Well, I know that after 9/11, I was at Justice when we did the anti-terrorism legislation. There was a concern that there would be, and there was in fact, a backlash against people of Middle Eastern origin and other minority groups, just as I think there's been a backlash against people of Asian origin, starting with the pandemic, because of the suspected origins of it. And at that time, the government put together a diversity roundtable to meet with representatives of these communities to at least talk about what the problems were and to find ways of trying to mitigate the harm. let me be clear. The fact that some communities may suffer a degree of harm is not a reason that we can avoid investigating legitimate claims of interference. But we need to be aware of that harm and try to work to mitigate it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Baines. That concludes the session for today. Mr. Rosenberg, before you leave, you were here when we had Mr. Fergus move the amendment on providing the documents. Is it reasonable, and I'm asking the committee this, reasonable to expect that Mr. Rosenberg do this by, let's say, 5 o'clock on Friday afternoon, May 5th? Is that reasonable, committee members? Okay.
That's 3 days from now?
Is
Today's Tuesday.
so I'm asking Mr. Rosenberg as well. Is that a reasonable request?
I assume that I can provide these electronically?
Yes, you can provide them to the clerk. And
Does
I would
that
ask,
translate?
I would ask that all documents that you are to provide and undertake to the committee be submitted before Friday at 5 o'clock. The other thing that I do need clarification on from the committee, we haven't done this, we didn't do this on Friday. Madame Fournier has been providing documents, so I would like to accord her the same opportunity by Friday at 5 o'clock as we just did with Mr. Rosenberg, to provide us with all of the documents that she said that she would provide. She's provided some at this point, but there may be more. So for both Mr. Rosenberg and Madame Fournier, do I have committee consensus? The clerk can advise Madame Fournier to have her documents here by 5 o'clock on Friday. Mr. Fergus, I see your hand up. No, I said, sorry, thumb up. I see no objection to that, so that I'll take that as direction as well. Mr. Rosenberg, on behalf of the committee and on behalf of Canadians, I'd like to thank you for appearing before our committee today. To our clerk, our analysts, and our technicians, thank you for your assistance today. This meeting is adjourned. I'm going to call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 68 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy, and Ethics. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of June 23rd, 2022, and therefore members can attend in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Should any technical challenges arise, please advise me. I don't expect that we're going to have any, but please note that we may need to suspend a few minutes as we may need to ensure that all members are able to participate fully. Now, pursuant to Standing Order 1083H and the motion adopted by the committee on Wednesday, December 7th, 2022, the committee resumed its study of foreign interference and threats to the integrity of democratic institutions, intellectual property, and the Canadian state. We do have one witness today, and I would like to welcome him as an individual, Mr. Morris Rosenberg. He's also the author of the report on the assessment of the 2021 Critical Incident Election Public Protocol and former president and CEO of the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation. Just before Mr. Rosenberg begins, I am going to advise the committee that we've received up to 120 pages from our witness on Friday. Many of them have to be translated. We've also received information that will have to be transcribed. My understanding is from the clerk that it may take a few days for that to happen. So up to, as I said, it's actually closer to 200 pages, is it not, Madam Clerk? Yeah. Okay. So we're going to have to wait a few days for those to be translated, and one piece of information that we've received that will have to be transcribed. Now, for the purposes of the committee, we are going to be here for a full 2 hours. Mr. Rosenberg has asked that he has 6 minutes to issue his statement to the committee. I'm going to grant that. Mr. Rosenberg, you can start now. 6 minutes, please, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you. Is my mic on? Okay, good. Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Prior to becoming president of the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation in September of 2014, I was a public servant working under both Conservative and Liberal governments. I was Deputy Minister of 3 departments, Justice, Health, and Foreign Affairs, for over 15 years, and I was appointed in the Foreign Affairs position by Prime Minister Harper. I want to disclose that I have been a member of the Conseil universitaire of the Université de Montréal since August 18th, 2016. I was not a member of the Conseil at the time of the donation in question. I've not participated in any discussions of the Conseil or its committees on what to do by the donation, with the donation received by the university. So I first want to address some of the points raised by Madame Fournier at this committee last Friday. The donation at issue occurred while I was president of the foundation, yet not once over the past weeks did foundation management reach out to me to answer any questions about the donation. Finally, Friday afternoon, the foundation sent me a package of materials, including 160 pages released under Access to Information, as well as a copy of the policy on donations in force in 2016. I'd be happy to share that with you. I believe the donation should be assessed from the perspective of Canada's relations with China in 2016 when it was made, not from the much more negative context which exists today. At that time, universities, corporations, and governments were all attempting to strengthen ties with China, including Mr. Harper's government that signed a Foreign Investment Protection Agreement in 2014. From that perspective, this was seen as a normal and desirable donation consistent with the Foundation's priorities. The tax receipt was made out to Millennium Golden Eagle Canada, Inc., because that is the entity which made the donation. A corporate search shows that this is a Canadian corporation headquartered in Dorval, Quebec. Therefore, this is not a foreign donation. All interactions with the Canada Revenue Agency were handled with care because the consequences for the Foundation of not doing so could result in a loss of its charitable status. It made no sense not to be scrupulous. In addition to being chair of Millennium Golden Eagle International, it's well known that Mr. Zhang was president of the China Cultural Industries Association. This is mentioned in articles in the Université de Montréal publications about the donations. He also represented himself that way at an earlier donation to the University of Toronto. There was nothing nefarious about staff in his organization contacting the foundation for administrative purposes like providing a mailing address to send a tax receipt. Moreover, if CSIS had any concerns about the donors, at no time did anyone from the service speak to me about this. And I don't think anybody else in the foundation either. Madame Fournier said that the donor list in the annual reports of the foundation identified the two individuals as donors rather than the company to whom the tax receipts were issued. I don't recollect the reason, but it makes sense that the foundation wanted to acknowledge and honor these two men whose names were associated with the conferences. Madame Fournier questioned whether Alexander Trudeau could legitimately sign the donor agreement on behalf of the foundation. As per the policy, I approved the donation or it wouldn't have gone forward. But the policy doesn't actually require that I put my own signature on a donation agreement. It was felt that, given that the donation was to honor Pierre Trudeau, who opened up diplomatic relations with China, it would be more appropriate for his son to represent the foundation at the ceremony and sign the agreement. This was consistent with the policy on donations in 2016. Second, I'd like to point out that Mr. Zhang's intent from the start appears to have been to donate $1 million to the University of Montreal Law School. This is confirmed in interviews in Le Devoir with both Mr. Guy Lefebvre, former Vice Rector of International Affairs at the university, as well as by former Canadian Ambassador to China, Guy Saint-Jacques, and I can provide you copies of those articles. Mr. Lefebvre, who was aware of a 2013 donation to the University of Toronto Medical School by these same donors, wanted to meet Mr. Zhang. It was Ambassador Saint-Jacques, our ambassador in China, who introduced Mr. Lefebvre to Mr. Zhang in 2014. As Mr. Saint-Denis told Le Devoir, it was à une époque encore rose, on se méfiait peu de la Chine. It's a much better era. We didn't really distrust China. In early September of 2014, M. Lefebvre invited the foundation to meet the donors who were in Montreal for a few days. At a meeting on September 24th, Mr. Zhang stated that the $1 million donation would establish scholarships for students at the University of Montreal Law School and perhaps eventually at other law schools in Canada. It was agreed that the foundation, the university, and Mr. Zhang would form a committee to flesh out the donation. However, on November 17, 2014, the university published an article announcing that they had already received a $1 million gift to the law school from these same donors, and there was no mention of the Trudeau Foundation. It was only in September of 2015, after several discussions, that the donors decided to earmark $200,000 of the original $1 million for the foundation to hold conferences. Third, at no time did the donors ask the foundation to connect them with government or political officials. Professor Wesley Wark of the Centre for International Governance Innovation, who has written extensively on foreign interference, said the following in his online newsletter of March 22nd. How exactly such a donation could be considered an influence operation in terms of how the funding was utilized was not addressed in the reporting. Knowing something about the operation of the Trudeau Foundation in supporting scholarly work, I have to scratch my head at the idea that this was a calculated interference operation. 30 seconds. Moreover, the foundation is independent from the Government of Canada and simply did not coordinate decisions with the government. The Trudeau Foundation has supported some brilliant scholars over the past 2 decades. Without its help, they wouldn't be where they are today. This is an important moment for the foundation, and I strongly believe that an independent investigation is needed to separate fact from innuendo. And just one last tiny point, I want to clarify something. Correct the public record on one thing. In an interview early in March with the Canadian press, I was asked if I'd met the donors, and I said I thought I met them once at the signing ceremony. Having now had access to these 160 pages of documents, I note that I was at a meeting with them on September 24th, 2014. I just wanted to put that on the record.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rosenberg. Also, for the benefit of committee tonight, we're being webcast, not televised, just so that everybody's aware of that. Circumstances beyond our control. We're going to start the first round of questioning with Mr. Barrett for 6 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
How often did Mr. Trudeau sign donation agreements?
Not often at all. far as I recall. Frankly, a lot of the donations didn't require donation agreements. This was a ceremony that took place at the University of Montreal. You had a document that was signed by officials of the University of Montreal and by Mr. Trudeau. It was quite a formal affair rather than what we would normally do with donations, where we'd receive a donation and send back a receipt.
Did the donors request that A. Trudeau or Mr. Alexandre Trudeau be involved in the ceremony?
I don't recall. I know he's appearing here tomorrow. It's a question you might well put to him. I don't recall whether they requested it or whether he thought that it was a good initiative on his part. And as I said, given the circumstances and the nature of the gift and the spirit in which it was given and his father's involvement in opening up diplomatic relations with China, it was felt that it was appropriate that he would be there.
Right, and while it may have been considered appropriate, it also could be problematic, not based on who his father was, but based on who his brother is, and based on the circumstances surrounding the donors. And I'd like to ask you a question about that. You said that it wasn't unusual to have staff from the company that these individuals claimed they were representing to provide a mailing address. What country was the mailing address that it was sent to?
It was China. This is all kind of in these documents. My understanding is that Mr. Zhang, and there's no secret
But
about...
isn't that unusual, sir? Though, for it to be, do you receive donations from many Canadian companies who ask you to send the paperwork back to China?
No, I don't.
Is this the only time that's happened?
As far as I know it is, but if I can explain. Mr. Zhang, if you look up Mr. Zhang online, you'll find that he wears a number of hats, including chair of Millennium Eagle Corporation, including being the president of the China Cultural Industry Association. And in fact, the address to which the donation was sent in China, you will see when you see the materials, is the address of Mr. Zhang as a director of Millennium Golden Eagle Canada Inc. that is noted in the corporate records kept by the corporation's branch in Ottawa.
And you'll table that you're undertaking to table the documents that you're
Absolutely.
referencing? Okay. And are you able to do that today? You have them in hand?
Well,
or?
I have them in hand, but I was told that the rules of the committee don't permit me to table paper.
Okay, just if you could.
We can waive that. Oh. Point of order, quickly.
All right. Go ahead, Mr. Green, with your point of
Mr.
order.
Chair, is there an ability for us to waive the rules and allow those documents to be tabled in paper? As well as a follow-up perhaps electronically if they're made available?
Yeah, my understanding is we may need a motion to do that, but I will clarify that with the clerk, or once a motion is proposed, we can seek unanimous consent.
I'll move a unanimous consent motion.
Just let me check with the clerk for
Sure.
a second.
Hey, Larry.
I could clarify a bit further if you'd like. No?
No, we'll just wait till he starts
Sorry,
starts my right back up there.
So, thank you for allowing me the time to clarify. You can't do that on a point of order. You have to do that when you have the floor. But you can also propose, Mr. Green, that notwithstanding the usual practice of the committee, that you could ask for these documents to be submitted, and I would hope that we would have unanimous consent for that. So we'll
Mr.
have
Chair, I'll
to wait.
acknowledge that Mr. Barrett has the floor and has the prerogative to do that at this time.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Barrett, you can continue.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, if that's okay.
ahead.
Which documents are we specifically referring to?
Well, Mr. Rosenberg has referred to 160 pages of document. What was that?
I don't have the whole 160 pages here. This is a corporate search on Millennium Golden Eagle International.
Okay,
So respectfully then,
the-
Mr. Chair,
The motion hasn't been moved, so there's
Okay.
actually no debate that's going on right now. I thought you were just seeking a point of clarification, which I accepted. Mr. Barrett, if you want to continue, you have 3 minutes to continue. Go ahead, sir.
Okay, thanks, Chair. So are you able to say at what point that the Prime Minister or his brother were raised in the negotiations that occurred over the 2-year period between the donors and the foundation?
I think very early on, not the Prime Minister, but Mr. Alexander Trudeau would have been involved. I started my job at the foundation in September of 2014. I know that Mr. Trudeau was having some discussions with Mr. Lefebvre from the University of Montreal before that, and you'd have to ask him when those began. I believe they began quite early in 2014.
When did you first learn about the donation?
Which one? The donation to the University of Montreal?
The donation destined for the Trudeau Foundation.
September of 2015.
And how did you learn about that?
You'll have to understand that we're talking about something that happened 8 years ago. So my memory of this was poor, but there is documentation here that I will provide to the committee in this 160 pages that suggests that there was no intent on the part of the donor to donate to the Trudeau Foundation initially. And
so who asked them for the money?
The University of Montreal.
The University of Montreal asked them to give $200,000 to the Trudeau Foundation?
No, I didn't say that.
So who asked for the donation to go to the Trudeau Foundation?
This came out of discussions that my staff had with the University of Montreal and with the donor over the course of several months that were the result of the meeting that I mentioned on September 24th, 2014. There was a committee set up, and as a result of that, by September of 2015, the donors had agreed that some of the money should go to the foundation.
30 seconds. Okay, so I've got very limited time left. It took 2 years, based on public reporting, to negotiate this donation, but within the 5-month period of the finalization and the money being flowed to the foundation, both of the gentlemen named as donors had direct access to meet with the Prime Minister as well as the Prime Minister's brother and senior people at the foundation. Do you understand why that set of circumstances is concerning for Canadians when these individuals have been identified in public reporting based on CSIS documents as cutouts acting on behalf of the communist dictatorship in Beijing?
All I can say on that is...
Do you understand why that's concerning for Canadians?
I read the newspapers, and I can understand why people would draw inferences from that. But I will say that the negotiations that took place that culminated in this agreement ended before the election in 2015. And in fact, these documents will point out that somewhere around the 11th of September 2015, there were plans to actually have the announcement ceremony in Montreal because the donors were in Montreal.
And you're talking about the donation to the foundation or to the university?
At September...
Sorry, I'm gonna have to end it there. You're gonna have to pick it up later. Mr. Rosenberg, I'm not sure whether you understand French or... Oui, OK. Madame Martinez Freda est prochaine pour 6 minutes. Si vous voulez, peut-être tu peux mettre ton écouteur aussi ou non? C'est à vos plaisirs. Go ahead, Madame Martinez Freda. 6 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur Rosenberg, merci d'être ici parmi nous. Je vais vous poser des questions très rapides pour m'assurer qu'on peut avoir toutes ces informations enregistrées. Vendredi dernier, je vais attendre que Monsieur Rosenberg ait son écouteur. OK? Merci. Donc, vendredi dernier, Madame Pascale Fournier a déclaré que la Fondation n'était pas une organisation partisane. Est-ce que vous considérez d'une manière ou d'une autre que la Fondation, sous votre gouverne, était une organisation partisane?
Monsieur le Président, pas du tout. J'ai toujours agi, premièrement, comme fonctionnaire dans le gouvernement, comme quelqu'un qui est non partisan indépendant, et j'ai pris le poste à la Fondation Trudeau dans la compréhension que c'était une organisation indépendante et non partisane.
Donc, vous pouvez donc affirmer que durant toute votre gouverne, à aucun moment, vous n'avez eu de relations partisanes, que ce soit avec le gouvernement ou même le parti politique, que ce soit avant ou après le gouvernement actuel.
C'est vrai.
Parfait.
Exact.
Est-ce que vous pouvez aussi déclarer, comme Mme Fournier, elle a déclaré vendredi dernier que le personnel n'était pas sélectionné sur la base d'antécédents partisans non plus?
Oh, non, absolument pas. Absolument pas. Et j'ai jamais été membre d'aucune parti politique, je dois dire.
J'imagine que vous avez jamais fait de don non plus politique.
Aucun.
Est-ce que Mme Fournier a déclaré que personne au sein de l'organisation ne faisait du lobby ou ne participait à l'organisation d'événements politiques partisans?
C'est exact.
Parfait. Mme Fournier a déclaré, puis je la cite, « Le premier ministre n'a pas été invité et n'a reçu aucune documentation de nos conseils d'administration, de nos réunions des membres et de nos comités gouvernementaux. Il n'a pas reçu d'invitation ni de documents d'aucune sorte. » Est-ce que c'est la même situation durant votre mandat?
Certainement.
Donc, vous n'avez jamais transmis des informations de la Fondation au gouvernement?
Jamais.
Parfait.
Non, avec des exceptions. Il y a eu des obligations de faire des rapports au ministère qui est maintenant, on appelle ICED en anglais, Industrie Canada, au moment de...
Je comprends. Donc, du reporting. Vous avez quand même,
oui.
Parce que vous receviez un financement public et vous aviez à donner un rapport sur vos activités,
c'est ça.
Mais c'était dans les obligations contractuelles avec le gouvernement sur le don, c'est ça? Mais jamais d'une façon proactive n'avez-vous partagé, justement, par exemple, les discussions que vous aviez avec l'association à travers le comité qui a été créé entre les universités et la Fondation, vous n'avez pas donné cette information au gouvernement?
Absolument pas. Il n'y a aucune coordination avec le gouvernement sur la donation.
Donc, le don a été géré et travaillé uniquement à travers ce comité sans aucune interférence du gouvernement.
Oui.
Parfait.
Et comme j'ai dit, pour la plupart des négociations ont eu lieu avant l'élection de 2015.
Parfait.
Et c'était pas signé à ce moment-là parce qu'il y a eu une petite partie qui traitait de l'Université de Montréal, pas de nous, qui n'était pas prêt. Et les donateurs ont quitté. Ils ont visité Montréal rarement. Donc, on a dû attendre une autre occasion pour le faire.
Parfait. Mme Fournier a également déclaré que la Fondation n'a jamais subi de pression pour organiser des conférences entre le Canada et la Chine. Donc, le don était lié à une entente qui était celle de faire des conférences, notamment sur les relations entre le Canada et la Chine. Est-ce que vous pouvez aussi nous dire si oui ou non vous avez reçu des pressions pour faire ces conférences qui étaient prévues dans le don?
J'ai reçu aucune pression de personne.
Parfait. Donc, il n'y a pas eu de suivi qui a été fait par l'association pour faire suite au don qui avait été remis. Donc,
non.
Des appels, des courriels, de dire pourquoi ça n'a pas été fait.
Je dois dire qu'il n'y a aucune demande de la part des donateurs de faire quoi que ce soit. Et le contexte dans l'accord, il y a eu des conférences qui doivent porter sur des questions globales, y inclut le Canada et la Chine, mais c'était très large. Et c'était à nous, en collaboration avec l'École de droit à Montréal, de décider sur la nature des conférences.
Dernière question que je pourrais vous poser, c'est par rapport au choix des récipiendaires de bourse, ou est-ce que vous avez à un certain moment reçu des pressions ou senti qu'il y avait des pressions pour qu'il y ait un choix d'universitaires ou de boursiers qui viennent, par exemple, de la communauté chinoise ou qui aient un intérêt particulier pour la Chine?
Aucun.
OK. Est-ce que vous pouvez aussi affirmer aux membres du comité que ce don a été fait en toute transparence, que ce don a été fait dans le respect des politiques internes de la Fondation et que ce don a été fait d'une façon où il n'y a eu aucune interférence qui a été faite par la Chine? Je pense que les membres et les Canadiens qui nous écoutent veulent s'assurer que la Fondation n'est pas dans une relation d'ingérence par rapport à la Chine.
Je pense que je peux vous assurer de ça.
Est-ce que vous pouvez nous affirmer aussi qu'il n'y a eu aucune interférence du gouvernement et du premier ministre par rapport au don qui a été fait sur la Fondation?
Je ne suis pas au courant d'aucune communication avec le PM, le bureau du PM ou des autres organismes au sein de l'appareil gouvernemental sur cette question.
Merci.
OK, merci, Madame Martinez-Ferretta, Monsieur Rosenberg. Pour la prochaine intervention, c'est Monsieur Velmure pour 6 minutes. Allez, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, M. le Président. J'aimerais débuter en déposant une motion qui a été distribuée auprès de la greffière, dont je vais faire la lecture.
OK.
Que dans le cadre du volet touchant la Fondation Trudeau de l'étude sur l'ingérence étrangère et les menaces entourant l'intégrité des institutions démocratiques, de la propriété intellectuelle et de l'État canadien, le comité puisse réinviter les témoins déjà entendus ou d'autres témoins que le comité jugera pertinents, suivant les informations qui seront révélées par les documents transmis par Mme Pascale Fournier, ancienne présidente directrice générale de la Fondation.
OK, merci, M. Villemure. Pour la raison que vous avez la parole, la motion est en ordre. Est-ce que nous avons des discussions? Est-ce que, Mme Gaffrey, est-ce que vous partagez le motion? Oui? OK. Tous les membres avaient la motion. Discussion sur la motion. M. Fergus, allez, s'il vous plaît.
Beaucoup, Monsieur le Président, puis je suis en train juste de trouver la motion, mais d'après ce que mon collègue a dit oralement, j'aimerais savoir si on peut modifier la proposition pour qu'on puisse ajouter les documents qui seront soumis par M. Rosenberg.
OK, nous avons un amendement de M. Fergus. Est-ce que le comité est en accord? Ms. Khalid, do you have something?
Chair, I do. I just wanted to check with you to see if this motion is tight enough. I just want to make sure that it's not vague, that it makes it difficult for you to do your job, Chair.
I appreciate that. We've been running into some circumstances where it's open to interpretation. In my view, I believe that Mr. Villemure's motion is appropriate and tight enough and gives direction to not just myself as the chair, but also the clerk as well. So I appreciate you asking that. We had an amendment from Mr. Fergus. Do we have unanimous consent to accept that amendment? Okay. Now, the motion as amended by Mr. Villemure, do we have unanimous consent for that? Okay. Madam Clerk, you're clear on that? Okay. Okay, merci. Monsieur Villemure, j'ai arrêté le temps. Vous avez 5 minutes et 54 secondes, s'il vous plaît. Commencez.
Merci, M. le Président. C'est extraordinaire. Merci, M. Rosenberg, d'être parmi nous aujourd'hui. J'aimerais savoir, comment ce don-là est-il arrivé à la Fondation? Vous gérez la Fondation, soudainement, il y a un don chinois.
Je vais essayer de vous expliquer.
Oui.
Mais ça, comme j'ai dit, c'est déjà 8 ans. Donc, c'était des documents que j'ai eus qui ont jogué mon mémoire un peu. Donc, ça va peut-être prendre tout votre temps si je fais ça.
Il faut essayer de faire tête.
OK, tête. Il y a premièrement dans le package une note de M. Lefebvre à l'Université de Montréal à moi, juste après que j'entre en fonction, qui dit, avant de mon entrée en fonction, il a discuté avec Alexandre Trudeau de la possibilité d'un donateur chinois. Il pensait que ce serait bon qu'ils attendent mon arrivée. Est-ce que je serai disponible pour une réunion à Montréal entre le 23 et le 25 septembre parce que M. Okay.
L'Université de Montréal vous a approché.
Oui.
D'accord. On lira les documents rendus à ce moment-là.
Okay.
Merci beaucoup. Mais quels ont été sous votre gouverne les liens de la Fondation et de la Chine en soi, là?
Pas grand-chose autre qu'un comité qui est établi. J'ai un procès-verbal de la réunion du 24 septembre avec moi, M. Lefebvre, les 2 donateurs chinois, les autres représentants de l'université et la Fondation. Et ils ont établi un comité de 3 personnes. Vous pouvez voir les noms des 3 personnes.
D'accord.
Qui se sont réunis quelques fois, ignore combien de fois. C'était ça la ligne entre nous et la Chine et l'Université de Montréal. Et je dois dire, très important dans ça, M. Lefebvre, c'est en anglais, dit que Mr. University of Montreal's position, the university wishes to develop a long-term relationship with the foundation. Mr. Zhang's position, the $1 million donation would establish scholarships for students at the Faculty of Law at the University of Montreal and eventually other universities in Canada.
Donc, est-ce que vous receviez d'autres dons d'autres pays?
Non, non. Je dois dire, il y a une chose, parce que le National Post a fait un article quelque temps en 2016 disant que les donations étrangères à la Fondation Trudeau ont augmenté énormément. Et ce que j'ai dit à ce moment-là, c'est que la plupart de cet argent, le grand pourcentage de cet argent venait d'une fondation enregistrée en Suisse, mais c'est une fondation dans le nom de John McCall McBain et sa femme, qui sont des Canadiens. McCall McBain est maintenant chancelier de l'Université McGill. Et c'était ça. Il y a eu quelques autres petits dons, je pense, je ne sais pas exactement, mais on n'a pas compté le don chinois parce que le donateur était une compagnie canadienne.
Et les dons de M. McBain étaient quand même relativement importants.
Oui, très importants.
On est un peu près du $1 million.
Oui.
D'accord.
Je ne me souviens pas exactement, mais c'était beaucoup plus que des autres dons.
Oui, 946 000. D'accord. Merci. Ben, dites-moi, quels étaient les motifs de votre renvoi de la Fondation?
Pardon?
Quels ont été les motifs de votre renvoi de la Fondation?
Quand j'ai quitté?
Oui.
OK. Premièrement, j'ai pris le poste pour 4 ans après que j'ai eu une carrière très longue au sein du fédéral. Après 3 ans, j'ai dit à M. McBain, en avril 2017, je veux pas avoir un renouvellement de mon contrat. Et je veux lui donner assez de temps d'organiser un processus pour trouver un successeur. Donc, l'implication qui était faite à vendredi que j'étais congédié, il n'y a aucune vérité à ça. J'ai eu une bonne relation avec M. McBain, avec les membres du conseil d'administration. J'ai eu des bonnes revues de performance et j'ai quitté sur avec une très bonne relation avec la Fondation.
Donc, vous diriez que les propos avancés par Mme Fournier sur un départ houleux, forcé, une gestion de crise qui suit votre départ et le départ de plusieurs employés de membres du CA au même moment, c'est faux.
Bien, je dois expliquer. Il y a certains éléments qui sont vrais, mais ce n'est pas à cause de crise. Il y a eu des membres de CA qui étaient là pour longtemps ou qui voulaient faire quelque autre chose et qui, dans quelques cas, j'ai amené au CA. Ils ont dit, quand tu quittes, je quitte aussi. Il y a eu certains problèmes avec des employés, quelques employés. On a envoyé quelqu'un pour nous aider dans ça. Dans un cas, on a perdu notre directrice de communication. Et j'ai décidé, parce que j'étais au courant que je vais quitter, de ne pas engager une nouvelle directrice de communication, mais de donner le soin à mon successeur de bâtir sa propre équipe.
Donc, vous ne parlez pas de gestion de crise suivant votre départ?
Non, il y a eu des problèmes. Je ne les caractérise pas comme crise, mais c'est des problèmes qu'on a dans la gestion d'une organisation. Mais on a toujours fait on a accompli tous les mandats de la Fondation, les bourses, les lauréats, les mentors, les conférences, etc.
D'accord. Merci. Je retiens que vous n'êtes pas en accord avec Mme Fournier là-dessus.
Pas du tout.
Merci.
Okay, merci, M. Villemure. Mr. Green, you are up next for 6 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Rosenberg, I'm going to put a series of questions to you in a rather rapid way. It's not personal. I may interject, take my time back, and move on to the next question. I'm going to ask you to try to be as concise as you can.
Okay.
Beginning in 2016, a National Post article, you stated that the $200,000 donation is not considered a foreign donation because it was made by a company registered in Canada. However, you issued a tax receipt for a company with a Chinese address. Were they the same companies?
The tax receipt was issued to the company. The Chinese address, as far as I understand it, was the address of Mr. Bin Zhang, who was, I believe, president of the company, and certainly a director of the company, as this document shows.
A personal address or a corporate address?
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure which address it is, but I will say this. There are letters in here from...
I will take the letters under consideration when they're submitted.
They're actually emails, sorry.
I'll take the emails as well. Do you believe that the donor on the tax receipt was the true donor of the $200,000?
As far as I know, yes.
In our last committee meeting, in an article from the press was referenced, which stated that in 2016, a board member made a senior staff member aware that the real donor was not the same donor as the tax receipt. In her testimony, Pascal Fournier stated that the board member in question was Farah Mohammed. in 2016, you were made aware that the real donor was not listed on the tax receipt.
No, sorry. I was listening on Friday, and I thought that conversation took place not in 2016, but in the past few weeks. I'm not sure.
So were you aware at that time? Were you made aware by Fair Mohammed
No,
on the
I
board
mean-
that it wasn't the same person?
No. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the donation was made by the company that's here registered in Dorval. I had no reason to think it was anybody
Well, you
else,
sent it to China.
because that's where Mr. Zhang's address was.
Did you conduct any type of audit, any type of eyes-wide-open approach to a risk assessment of sending a tax receipt to a foreign company or to a foreign location?
No, because the only company that could use the tax receipt would be the Canadian company to whom it was issued.
In her testimony to the committee, Pascal Fournier stated that the 2016 receipt that was issued by the foundation and signed off by yourself did not include the names of the two donors that were mentioned in the contract and included the address in China. So did the foundation have any policies on those types of discrepancies?
I don't believe it had any policies, particularly. I think the policy was the tax receipt should be issued to the entity, either an individual or a corporation, that makes the donation. And that's what we did.
So what you signed off on, did it include the name of the two donors?
I don't remember. As far as I can tell, we signed off on, there is one tax receipt in the package to Millennium Corporation, the one in Dorval. The name of the donors isn't on there. There was an issue around what the correct address was.
Were the donors board members of the Millennium Gold Eagle?
Mr. Zhang was a board member of Millennium.
Was the other?
No.
So you issued a tax receipt to a corporation that did not include one of the donors?
Because because the corporation was the donor.
Not the two people who made the donation.
The money came from the corporation.
In an annual report in 2016, 2017, the information that was shared with the CRA, the name of the company, Millennium Gold Eagle, was not included, but the name of the donors were.
Yes.
Can you explain the discrepancy between that and what you just said?
I thought I did in my opening remarks by saying that I think that it made sense for the foundation, having met its obligations to the CRA, to have put the name of the two individuals who were the face of the donation and in whose name these conferences would be held.
In any of your board meetings, did any of the board members or any of the senior staff, including legal or financial or otherwise, raise concerns around the discrepancy and the sensitivity of the donations?
I do not recall that they did, and the other thing that I will say is that there were controls in place in the foundation to deal with the issue of receipting on donations. As you'll see from the package, the correspondence was between two more junior employees of the foundation on the receipting, along with a representative of the China Cultural Industry Association who was working for Mr. Zhang, who simply said, could you please send it to this address? So when you say instructions from China, they were about what address to send them to.
Was the address in China the address of the Chinese Cultural Industry Association?
The address that we have, and the only research I've been able to do, is that it's the same address, ultimately, as the address given for Mr. Zhang in this Canadian government.
Sure, but you didn't, I'm sure a Google search or something would probably bring up. I just want you to have the opportunity to put on the record that it wasn't the Chinese Cultural Industry Association, because you would recognize the relationship between the Chinese People's Republic of China and this association, right, as being
I would recognize
a
that it's what I would call a soft power organization that was involved in the U of T donation, that was involved in the U of M donation. So two of the biggest universities in Canada.
Last question. You'd mentioned the governance around the board, and I'm trying to determine whether these are significant governance issues that's gotten us here today, or whether there's something more. I think that's where I'm at. Can you just explain to me the nature in which board members are appointed? I'm understanding there's three categories: ISET appointees, Trudeau family appointees, and the members. Is that correct?
Independent appointees, I guess I'd call them.
Not independent of the family. They make direct appointments, do they not?
No, sorry. The members of the board, the members of the foundation, which are the equivalent of shareholders of a for-profit corporation, They have two jobs. One is to choose the auditors, the other is to appoint the board.
All of the board?
No, the independent members of the board, and then you've got because you have three categories of members. You've got
Right.
family members, you've got government members, and you have independent members.
Who has the majority of the seats on the board?
The independents, I believe.
Mr. Green?
Thank you.
That concludes our first round. We are going to go back to Mr. Barrett for 5 minutes. And Mr. Rosenberg, just so you know, typically on this committee, the exchanges happen between the members. I'm not so formal as for it to come through the chair, so any interaction you have is directly with committee members. Go ahead, Mr. Barrett, for 5 minutes.
Did you follow the CCIA instructions on where to send the donation?
I believe that my staff did. I wasn't aware at the time, I don't believe, of these interactions, and I don't believe I'm copied on any of this material.
So the receipt was sent to Hong Kong and then to Beijing, is that correct?
I believe so. I should just say that the 160 pages of access...
You signed the receipt, though,
Yeah, I signed the receipt.
but you don't know where it was sent.
You're asking me to remember 8 years later where a receipt was sent. I don't.
With all due respect, you said that this was an unusual circumstance, unusual in that Mr. Trudeau signed this donation agreement in an unusual ceremony with an unusually large donation from a foreign country, which is quite unusual for the Trudeau Foundation. Is that fair? That this is not a usual set of circumstances that we're talking about here? I highlight that it's so unusual because that's what we're seeing in public reporting. We're seeing that a donation was made by individuals who are effectively cutouts for a soft power operation operating on behalf of a communist dictatorship looking to wield influence in Canada. And you were the DM Foreign Affairs. Is that correct?
I was.
In your time in the public service. You would have been briefed and aware of foreign influence tactics as a part of that job. Is that correct?
Yes.
Did you not find it odd that this donation from Beijing, from cutouts acting directly on behalf of the communist dictatorship in Beijing, were suddenly looking to target a donation to a foundation that bared the name of one of the candidates for prime minister in the election? You said that it was, a couple weeks before E-Day in 2015, and they want to get the money out the door quickly. Does that not strike you as concerning, but based on your training?
Well, I guess, if you want, as I said in my opening remarks, you have to look at this from the context of 2016. In context of 2016, just about every university in Canada, many corporations, government of Canada, including the Harper government, had changed their attitude towards China.
With all due respect, sir, this is as you said, this is very unusual. How many times, I just need you to confirm, did Mr. Alexandre Trudeau sign for donations on behalf of the foundation?
I know of this one, and I can't confirm. I don't know of any others. I'm not sure there weren't ever any others.
Did you have any conversations with Mr. Alexandre Trudeau about this donation?
I probably did, but I don't recall them.
Did he ever raise donors or donations from China with you?
You mean other than this?
Yeah.
No.
I want to go back to, you did a lookup, an Industry Canada lookup, and to Mr. Green's question with respect to the China Cultural Industry Association. It's problematic, this link, because of its direct connections to the CCP. The address that this donation was sent to is incredibly important. You said you're not sure about where it went. Are you able to verify that by searching your records, or would an email search confirm that?
I don't have access to the Foundation's records. All I have access to right now is the 160 pages that were provided under access to information. I know that representatives of the Foundation are coming, and they have access to all of those records, and you perhaps would be better to ask them. I can't get those records myself.
I think that in 2016 we were aware of attempts by foreign governments to try and influence our democracy. I want to ask one last question with my remaining time. You saw the reporting after the donation was received. In 2022 and 2023, you would have been aware, with the benefit of hindsight, of what appears, to be a very problematic donation at best, but an obvious influence attempt by the Chinese dictatorship at worst. Do you think it was appropriate for you to accept a role to investigate foreign influence in our elections when this had occurred at the Trudeau Foundation, which is, as has been reported, what seems quite clearly to be an influence operation to target the Prime Minister?
I need a very quick response, Mr. Rosenberg. Very quick.
Yeah, I didn't see a connection. As I've cited Professor Wark, he just didn't see how this was an influence operation at all, and either did I, frankly. And when I took the job, by the way, back in June or July, I was offered by the Privy Council office to examine one. I wasn't giving the whole, view on whether there'd been election interference. I was examining the operation of this one piece, the protocol, and whether it was adequate. And I said, well, it worked as it was intended to work, but there are some really big problems with it.
Okay.
Now, I know nobody wants to talk to me about my report, but there's a lot of stuff in that report that is critical of the government. There are 16 recommendations on things that they need to fix.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenberg. Thank you. Mr. Barrett, I believe I have Ms. Hepner next. Go ahead, please.
Correct.
5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Mr. Rosenberg, for being here with us today. I would like to go back to your experience as Deputy Minister. You served in both Conservative and Liberal governments, and I'd like you to tell us a little bit more about that experience and the different ministers that you worked for.
Sure. I worked for Anne McClellan, Martin Cochon, Erwin Kotler, Nigel Desange, Tony Clement, Leona Gluka, Lawrence Cannon, and John Baird.
And so would you say that a deputy minister has to remain nonpartisan, and how do you go about doing that in your job as deputy minister?
Well, there are a number of ways you go about doing it. First of all, you don't engage in overt political activity. Secondly, to the extent that politicians try to politicize the public service, you push back on that. Thirdly, you give your best advice. Now, the advice isn't tone deaf to politics, because there's no point giving advice that has zero chance of being implemented, but it is the best neutral advice that you can give.
Thank you. And just a moment ago, you were speaking about your selection by the Privy Council office to write the 2021 Critical Election Incident Public Protocol. How does one go about being selected to write a report like that?
Well, I got a call from the Assistant Secretary who said, or actually an email, we're looking for somebody to do this independent report that was done by another former colleague in 2019 after the election. Are you interested? And here's his public report and the protocol. I read it and I called him up. I said, sure, it looked like a really interesting job. The other thing
Purely civil service process.
In fact, it was supposed to be independent of the government. So yes, purely civil service process. And, at the end of the day, the story about the Trudeau Foundation, that there was a meeting in 2014, according to an anonymous source given to the Globe and Mail, where somebody said to apparently this donor, give money to the Trudeau Foundation and we'll pay you back. That actually came out on February 28th. I gave my report in before the end of the year. And there was no issue. And as I say, I wasn't examining election interference per se. I was examining whether this protocol worked, whether the right people were talking to the right people, whether the standard in the protocol actually made sense, because the nature of the problem of foreign interference continued to evolve from the time the protocol was first set up.
And you, one of the conclusions in your report was that attempts to interfere with the 2021 federal election did not affect the results. However, you also stated that the government should consider changing rules to allow the panel to alert Canadians to potential impacts on election integrity. So please tell us what that would look like. at what point should Canadians be alerted? What would be the threshold?
So this is an issue that I didn't actually make a recommendation on, but I did say it needs study. And I talked to the Liberals, the NDP, and Conservatives. The Bloc Québécois didn't want to talk to me. And there are different views among the parties, but I felt that the threshold is so high that only something akin to Russian interference in the U.S. election in 2016 would invoke the threshold. But what happens if you're aware that one or two ridings or a particular ethnic group is being targeted with false information and nobody says anything to them? So I'm thinking that maybe you need to consider a way of communicating to the public without saying the sky is falling, the whole election is going to be undermined, but that in specific instances, there is a problem, and you should be aware. This happened in the U.S. before the 2020 election. 3 weeks before, there was a press conference by the FBI and their cybersecurity agency about Iranians posing as Proud Boys and emailing voters in Alaska and Florida, telling them, you better vote for Donald Trump or else. So these agencies came out and said, hey, this is false.
Thank you. So you talked about the length of your public service. And so I'm sure you know that since 2015, this government has brought in several measures, including the creation of NSICOP, the creation of the Security Intelligent Threats to Election Task Force, the National Security and Intelligence Review Agency, and there's more. What was done before 2015 to counter foreign interference?
I don't recall what was done before 2015 to counter foreign interference. I think the issue has really come up a lot more since the 2016 U.S. election. And I think that spurred a lot of government, and other things, and the French election, and there seemed to be Russian interference in the French election. And I think that really raised people's sensitivity about this and the need to do things. And I would say that keeps evolving. So just because the government put a 5-point plan in a couple of years ago, you cannot rest on your laurels. That plan needs to be updated. The nature of the threat is changing.
Thank you, Ms. Hepner. La prochaine intervention, M. Villemure, pour 2 minutes et demie, s'il vous plaît.
M. Rosenberg, vous comprendrez que j'ai 2 minutes et demie. Donc, j'aimerais savoir qui a initié la rencontre avec les 5 sous-ministres qui s'est tenue à l'édifice Langevin?
Probablement c'est moi, et je vais expliquer ça. Okay? Une des raisons pour laquelle j'étais intéressé à la Fondation Trudeau, c'est que je trouvais qu'il y a peut-être trop de barrières entre les chercheurs, le monde des chercheurs et des académiques, et le monde de policy. Et je pensais que c'est important que le monde de policy est au courant des recherches qui sont faites, parce que c'est les fonds publics qui paient pour ça. Et je dois dire, mon pratique et la pratique de mes collègues sous-ministres était quand on a eu des comités, j'ai présidé par exemple un comité sur des questions globales. Et on a toujours essayé d'inviter des universitaires ou des membres des institutions de recherche d'aller nous parler de ça.
Mais dites-moi, je vais aller absolument 2 minutes et demie, je vous interromps, je m'excuse. C'est quand même assez inhabituel que la Fondation Trudeau se retrouve dans l'édifice du premier ministre avec un accès avec 5 sous-ministres. C'est quand même pas fréquent, là.
C'est peut-être pas fréquent, mais premièrement, l'édifice Langevin, c'était l'édifice Langevin à ce moment-là, c'est très central au centre-ville d'Ottawa. C'est une place où des autres fonctionnaires se rencontrent souvent. C'est pas juste le bureau du premier ministre, c'est le bureau de conseil privé qui est là. Et la question, la sujet en question, c'était les bénéfices économiques de la diversité. La diversité, c'était une chose intéressante au gouvernement. Et on a eu une de nos lauréats et une de nos mentors qui ont fait une recherche sur cette question. Et j'ai parlé à quelqu'un et dit, ça va peut-être être intéressant que vos gars sont au courant.
Mais
et ça touche...
Dites-moi, je m'excuse de nouveau, mais dites-moi, l'accès à l'édifice Langevin, c'est pas donné à tous, là.
Je pense que c'est donné avec permission. Il y a des gens qui sont là. C'est pas une prison, c'est accessible si nécessaire.
Vous ne trouvez pas que ma question est inhabituelle comme ça? Je me soucie pour rien ici.
Je ne sais pas si c'est si habituel que ça. Des gens, et j'étais au bureau de conseil privé aussi pour 5 années, et je voulais avoir des rencontres avec des personnes autres que des fonctionnaires, parce que pour faire de la politique publique, on doit être au courant des autres points de vue.
D'accord.
Okay, merci, Monsieur Villemure. Mr. Green, 2.5 minutes, please. Go ahead.
Given the media coverage of the donation in 2016, did you consider conducting an audit at the time?
No.
Did the foundation conduct any further investigations to the donors, the source of donation, or the conditions of the donation in light of the media coverage?
No, because the media coverage at that time was making a link between a meeting that the Prime Minister had been at, so-called Cash for Access meeting, and the proximity of that to the timing of the donation. And we knew that there had been no coordination with the Office of the Prime Minister or anybody else in the government on the timing of the donation, and we were completely unaware of the dinner that the Prime Minister attended.
Was there any communication between you and the PMO's office?
Not me, although I do recall one article that I saw, there's been a lot written about this, that there was a call from the Prime Minister's office to one of the staff in the foundation.
Ms. Fournier stated that she remembers reviewing emails between the executive director, Elise Comatos, and the Comtois, je m'excuse, and the PMO. Were you aware of these emails?
I don't recall, but I will say this, I'll just go back and say, if there were emails and there were documents that raised questions about this stuff, then why didn't the foundation management call me to at least get my view on it so I could see the stuff? And
those are important questions. There was some testimony by Ms. Fournier that there was some disarray in the governance structures. We saw when you left that board members did leave en masse. That's not typical.
I don't think they left en masse.
Was there, how many board members left at the time?
Well, I'd have to go back and see. I know of 2.
So more left after that?
I don't know. I mean, I didn't, once I left, I left.
No, I can appreciate that. But you're stating that you had no information, the executive director wouldn't have informed you of email communication between the foundation and the PMO's office?
It's possible, but I really, sorry, I'm trying to answer your questions, but I also know enough to say that when I don't recall.
That's fair.
I don't recall.
Do you recall there being meetings hosted at the PMO with the foundation?
Absolutely not.
No?
No, I mean, there weren't.
There weren't. That's categorically denying.
As I answered earlier, we were independent and very sensitive to that independence from the government, and doubly sensitive, I think, once Mr. Trudeau became Prime Minister.
Rightfully so.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Green. Mr. Rosenberg, on va avec les 2 rangs pour finir cette tour. Pour 5 minutes, un pour les conservateurs puis un pour le Parti libéral. Après ça, on va recommencer avec 6 minutes chacun. Et moi, je vais faire des ajustements à la fin de la séance pour le temps. Et je vais, I'll tell everybody where we're at.